Welcome, my name is Rob McCollum, and this is my English 6021 presentation on my research project. It's titled A Tabletop Role-Playing Game-Based Composition Course. In the course of this presentation, I want to talk about how we can encourage students to develop academic literacy skills, reading and writing, through the use of tabletop role-playing games. So here's the overall structure of what I want to talk about: how I got interested in tabletop role-playing games, some related theories to how tabletop role-playing games relate to language development, and then talk about how I've used tabletop role-playing games to target oral language skills, what I've done more recently to target written language skills, and then finally some classroom implications and also research recommendations. So first, I became interested in tabletop role-playing games as an educational tool during the pandemic when I had a chance to attend the Gen Con conference online. Because of the pandemic, the entire conference got moved online and they made all sessions available free to online visitors. And so in between all my work and all the things I was doing, I attended a couple sessions, and one in particular really struck me about its value for education. And this was a session by a group of therapists who treat youth in kind of detention facilities. And their goal was to use a role-playing game system called Kids on Bikes to teach youth interpersonal communication skills, help them to express themselves, their feelings, help them cooperate and problem solve together. And they said it was very successful. And that session got me thinking about, to what degree could a tabletop role-playing game be used for language learning, since that is my field of study and my primary work at the university. And it got me interested in then investigating what current research had already found about tabletop role-playing games and language development. And in particular, one study that I really enjoyed reading was some graduate work by Farkas. And he said that everything that happens in an RPG must first be heard, then mentally processed, then verbally expressed for the game to function. This means that the two base skills being used in the language, listening and speaking, are the main tools players use to participate in the game. Now, he goes on to say more here, but this really struck me that more than I've studied games and language learning for a lot, years, decades. But what I really appreciate about this is that more than any other game that I had read about, this game was entirely built around language. If you don't have language and you don't use language, you can't play the game. You can't rely on some kind of visual tools to get you through it. It's entirely imaginary, and so it needs to be processed and communicated through language. Now, obviously, this is focusing a lot on oral language, but that's where I started. This is just kind of a funny meme that I came across. But it talks about how some of these skills from a tabletop role-playing game like Dungeons and Dragons are transferable. This idea of being able to resolve conflict and be able to describe people and places and things and collaborate with one another. So I think that I thought that there was this great potential that maybe what happens in a tabletop role-playing game is transferable to other kinds of language skills and situations. This is a chart that kind of represents some of the language skills that are needed to be successful at the post-secondary level. You need to be able to ask and answer questions, describe people and places, resolve conflict, narrate, and talk about the future and discuss plans. So these were kind of the things I had in mind that I figured tabletop role-playing games needed to be able to address if it could be a useful tool for what learners need to be able to do. I want to talk about a couple theories that relate specifically to role-playing games. And one of them is this value of taking on a role. And this was raised in the Corbett article that we read in our English 6021 class near the beginning of the semester. And this is what got me thinking about, could I take what I've already learned about role-playing games and apply them to a composition classroom? And essentially the idea of a role and the research behind role-playing suggests that everyone has this affective filter. And an affective filter is a barrier having to do with our feelings that can prevent us from experimenting, trying, and doing risk-taking. And that affective filter prevents us from doing it. But if we can lower that affective filter, then the chances that we will risk take and experiment can increase. And so playing a role, taking on a role, not our personal identity, this role of this character, this imaginary person, can help people lower that affective filter, because then they do more risk taking. They can be more free with the language. And so that's what sparked my interest is maybe, as Corbett said, to learn to develop the academic voice and participate in academic discourse, if we took on the role of this academic, this person who is already proficient, knows how to do these things, then it could help learners experiment with the language and adopt these things that can seem like foreign to them because it's not part of their current identity. Now, related to this is other research by Ellis as well, who's talking about the value of games. And part of this is that games are motivating to people. There's lots of research we can find on this. The other aspect is that games also increase interaction between people, and lots of language learning and development happens through interaction. There's a concept called the interaction hypothesis that we can't really acquire language unless we are using it and interacting with others. It helps us to notice it, helps us to acquire it, so it's really important. So game is a great way to encourage that kind of interaction. Now, in order to define what are the kinds of skills that tabletop role-playing games provide, the language skills, I read through research. These are a couple of books that are actually available in the SU library. And I read through these books to identify what kinds of tasks researchers have claimed are happening when people play role-playing games. And so I've got the list there. What I thought was great is that these same tasks in the green column that come from the book about what are common things that happen in role-playing games match almost perfectly with the speaking functions from the ACTFL scale. ACTFL is the American Council for the Teaching of Foreign Languages. And so everything that I would expect learners need to do in order to show proficiency at the university level are the kinds of things that they would practice and develop through playing role-playing games. So I designed a course, and I've had this course going on for about a year, but I mostly just focused on the oral language in the course. They did reading and writing things, but it was never really connected to the gameplay. I used a system called Kids on Brooms, related to the Kids on Bikes system. But I chose Kids on Brooms because the setting is more a magical school. I thought that'd be more interesting for students. And the Kids on Bikes one requires a little more knowledge of kind of American culture, especially kind of like focused on 1980s kind of Goonies kind of ideas, or ET. And I didn't want to bring that baggage in where my students are not going, they didn't grow up in the 80s, they don't know anything about that. And also they may not know a lot about American culture, whereas Kids on Brooms is kind of culturally independent. And most students are familiar at least with the idea of Harry Potter and its films. So I felt like it was a good way that they could get immersed in the topic without needing a lot of cultural knowledge that they didn't already have. So I went through my course, and here's kind of a synthesis and a comparison of, again, in the green column, what theorists say tabletop role-playing games provide in terms of oral language skills. And then the turquoise, that first column, what the ACTFL scale says we need in order to be ready for university study in a language. And then the blue column on the right is the kinds of activities that I did in my class to help learners practice those skills. And for the most part, I was able to cover everything that is required through our different sessions. They could do things like describing and planning and narrating. So I felt really comfortable and confident that the oral language aspect of my course was meeting the language outcomes that I wanted. Now I want to do the same thing with writing. And so this is something I've done just in the last 6 weeks. In the second half of the semester, I taught another online course. And so I wanted to use the TTRPG curriculum, but I wanted to think more carefully about integrating writing into it and not just having the reading and writing course be kind of a separate thing. And so this is something that I didn't have at the beginning, and I developed. It's kind of like flying the airplane while you're building it. But I read through 3 or 4 different proficiency standards that deal with writing skills. One of them is college and career readiness related to Common Core, Canadian language benchmarks, again, the ACTFL scale, but focusing on writing, and then the CEFR, which is a common European frame of reference and for its writing. And so synthesized kind of those 4 standards and came up with a list of what are the kinds of skills that we probably want students to have when they're ready for a composition course at the university level. Some of these are more functional, interactional kind of language, which traditionally composition courses don't cover. They focus just more on academic things, but I wanted to cover both of them. And so you'll see near the bottom there, we have things that are a little more common with academic things like the summarizing, note-taking, arguing, revising, and synthesizing. The earlier ones are more common with transactional types of writing. And then so now on this second column here on the right, we have the writing or the activities that I integrated into my course. And I didn't want to do too much too soon because I was still experimenting. So I had 3 main writing assignments in a 6-week course. So they had kind of 2 weeks to work on each one. And the first one was a character sketch. They have to create a character through the course and they describe it to each other. They do lots of good activities where they ask each other questions about who is your character. But then I wanted them to write a character sketch. And I thought, this is something that happens often in literature courses. So I thought there was some relevance there, but I thought it helped good description skills, good paragraphing that they would work on. And it would be just kind of a good way to ease into the course and help me see what their strengths and weaknesses are. Now, the second one was a scholarship application letter. So by this time in the course, they already know each other's characters. They've done a few activities and told stories about what their characters could do and the past of their characters. So I wanted them to do a little more transactional writing. They had to imagine that their character was applying for a scholarship with the Magical Academy. We call the Magical Academy SUMAC, Southern Utah Magical Academy. And they had to write a letter to the school headmaster where they described their character's background, and created an argument for why their character deserved to receive a scholarship, and what they would do in the future to give back to the community and the school as a result of having received that scholarship. And so it was kind of a complex. I'd never taught how to write a scholarship letter before, but I thought it would be a very useful type of document for students to write and very different from a character sketch. The last one, again, was something new I've never done in a writing course, but I asked students to write a newspaper article. We had just finished doing an oral language game session where they had an encounter with a creature. So all the characters had to work together. They rolled the dice, they tried different things, and eventually they resolved this problem with the monster. And what they needed to do then was pretend that they were a reporter for the school newspaper, and they could pretend to interview all of the characters who had participated in the event, but they had to write a newspaper article that summarized it for the school newspaper. And so there was lots of new skills there. And I gave them articles and videos to watch about how to write a newspaper article, just like I'd done with the scholarship application letter. And I was really impressed with what they were able to do. They really were able to switch voice for each of these, between the scholarship letter sounding like a student trying to use the academic voice, and then sounding like a reporter using that sort of unbiased news reporting voice. I was just really impressed with the quality of work they produced. So here's my recommendations. First, I had students fill out just last week a summary of the course, or an evaluation of the course. And what they said is they liked the course, they liked the integration between the writing tasks and what we did in the game sessions. They just wish there were more game sessions. And we were only really meeting about once a week. And some of the earlier ones were more helping them learn how to design their character. They would have liked more game sessions, essentially, is what they wanted. They wanted to play the game more together. They really liked it. The other thing that I felt I could do to improve the course, and this is based off of interactions that I had throughout the course experience with the Language Learning Pedagogy Research Group on Discord. I hate the Discord website. It looks like a 1990s web page, but it was a great way to connect with other researchers who are interested in this topic. And they gave lots of suggestions for other kinds of readings that I could integrate into the course. Someone suggested give each student a different artifact that they have to read, and then when they come in the gaming session, they have to summarize and explain their artifacts together, or maybe they have to send each other written summaries. Maybe have to work together, use these artifacts or documents to then synthesize information and write reports. And those are all things I think could be easily integrated into the gaming campaign. So there's lots more that I would like to do with reading and synthesis, and not just writing skills in the course. So those are things I would look at exploring in the future. When it comes to research, future research, it would be really interesting, instead of just doing a case study like I did and asking students how they felt and observing what they did, do a control. Get some teachers who teach a traditional composition course, get some teachers who are teaching the tabletop RPG course, and then compare their writing skills at the beginning and the end. Was there any difference? Okay. Is a TTRPG course, even though it's mainly games focused, can it help get students to the same level of quality as a traditional course? Maybe it does even better. I don't know. Also doing some more objective investigations into role-playing and academic voice. Did the effective filter feel lower for students in the TTRPG course versus students who take a traditional course? Did they have a harder time imagining themselves as an academic writer than my students did? And also about motivation. Is there a difference in how students feel about the course and their desire to come to class and their desire to participate? Does the games-based course increase motivation more than the traditional classroom? I mean, my guess is yes, but I would like to actually have some evidence to support that argument. So that has been my experience. I hope that this was interesting to you. I really want to thank everyone in the course, both our instructor and our classmates, for helping me, giving me suggestions, and really for creating this learning community that I've learned so much from this semester. So thank you.